The town of Dry Marrow sat 30 miles from the nearest rail line, 30 miles past the end of most men's patience. It was a place of wind-hollowed bones and sun-choked silence, where the land cracked like old leather and the sky pressed down like a sentence. Those who stayed long enough either learned to speak to the dirt or kept to themselves and let the land do the talking. Ezekiel Dunn was the latter kind. He'd been on his spread, Snake Hollow Ranch, going on 15 years. Tall, taciturn, scarred across the left jaw by an old cavalry saber he never spoke of. He owned cattle, a few dozen head of stubborn longhorns, and a lamed-up Appaloosa mare named Blue. Ezekiel was 39, some said 40. No wife, no children. He lived in a weather-warped house of oak and shale with 3 rifles by the door and a book of Psalms unread on the nightstand. The letter arrived in April. It came in a blue envelope, the handwriting narrow and desperate, written by someone who'd learned their script in fear. A broker out of Wichita Falls had attached a note: mother destitute, girl 18, deaf, strong worker, no dowry. Signed consent. Ezekiel read it once, read it twice, then folded it without a sound. He didn't drink, didn't gamble, and he didn't take kindly to women with fast eyes and limp morals, but this wasn't that. This was a trade plain and sharp-edged, a girl unwanted, a man alone, paper for body, silence for silence. He sent back $50. The girl came by freight wagon 12 days later, sitting upright and still in a second-hand calico dress. She carried a patched valise and wore scuffed boots a size too small. Her hands were thin and scarred. Her black hair was braided tight against her scalp like it had been pulled for discipline. She did not smile. She did not flinch. She looked Ezekiel in the eye and nodded once. She was not what he expected. Younger, yes, but something more, an alertness in the way her eyes scanned the horizon, like a wild animal trained to stillness but born to flight. Her name, she signed with slow fingers, was Clara. The first thing he did was clear out the second bedroom, setting a cot and a wash basin near the hearth. He gave her space. She took it without fear, moving quiet as dust through the house, sweeping floors, mending his shirts, cooking without salt. He tried to speak with his hands, halting, crude signs learned from the pamphlet, but mostly he let her be. She never looked confused. She always seemed to know. After 3 weeks, she began feeding the cattle, walking them out to graze and back again. She never needed instruction. Ezekiel watched from the porch some mornings, mug in hand, and wondered how a deaf girl could move with such exact sense. Sometimes he'd speak aloud, just out of habit. Storm common in from the west, or coyotes near the fence last night. And she'd glance at him, nod, then take the axe or the rope or whatever tool fit the unspoken need. He thought she read lips. Maybe that was it. But her eyes would catch on things his never did. A cracked board, a hoof with a split, the shimmer of heat in the grass where a rattler curled. In the 4th week, he came home late from the south pasture and found a plate of beans still warm on the stove, coffee fresh, and her sitting in the rocker, mending his coat. She looked up and spoke aloud. "I thought you'd be home sooner." Her voice was raw, unused, thick with the drag of disuse. But it was sound, not sign, not guesswork, a voice. Ezekiel froze in the doorway. She met his stare, not ashamed. Not apologetic. "You hear," he said. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded once. "Not always, not well, but I do." He said nothing. He sat and ate and said nothing. And when he went to bed, he lay awake listening to the whisper of wind against the pane and thinking of everything she'd heard while pretending not to. By morning, nothing had changed. She brought him coffee, took the wagon to the creek, mucked the stalls. The silence between them remained, but it was no longer the silence of absence. It was the silence of secrets. And Ezekiel knew, in some place deeper than reason, that the girl had not come to this ranch to be saved. She had come to watch, to wait, to bury something or someone, and maybe to rise. Summer in dry Merrow came sudden, like a door slammed shut. The earth baked hard, dust turned to powder, and cattle went slack-jawed under the hammering sun. It was a time for watchfulness. A time when fences failed and men snapped without warning. Clara adjusted without a word. She cut her skirts shorter and tied a kerchief over her nose when she rode fence. She learned the lines of the land the way a body learns pain, slow, bone-deep, without asking permission. Ezekiel watched her build callus and muscle, but it wasn't the hard work that set her apart. It was her memory. She remembered which calf had a weak knee, which post was lining, which days the clouds thickened but held no rain. She moved like someone who couldn't afford to forget, like forgetting got you killed. Ezekiel didn't press her about the lie, not about the hearing, not about her past. He didn't ask why a mother would sell her daughter or why a girl would pretend to be deaf for so long. He figured she had her reasons, and he'd never been one to pry. But some nights, lying still with only the sound of creaking boards and a restless wind, he thought of what else she might be pretending. It was the 6th week when the rider came. A man of broken teeth and a belly that rode low in the saddle, he dismounted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and spit tobacco across Ezekiel's porch. "Name, Holly's Grieve," he said. "Heard you took on a girl from Wichita Falls." Ezekiel didn't answer, just leaned against the doorframe and watched the man's eyes flick over his house like a dog sniffing for meat. "Don't mean trouble," Holly's added, grin widening. "Just lookin' to make sure she's all right. Her ma had some debts. Thought maybe the girl'd want to square 'em." Clara stepped into the doorway behind Ezekiel without being called. She looked at the man, not startled, not afraid. Just present, like she'd been waiting for this shape to walk out of the horizon. Holly's smile stuttered. "Well, I'll be. You got tall, girl." Clara didn't speak, didn't move. Holly's tried again. "Ain't here to cause a stir. Just sayin' her mama's in a bind. Owes more than she had a right to. Thought maybe you'd do right, Bane her husband and all." "I ain't her husband," Ezekiel said flatly. Holly squinted. "She yours, ain't she?" Ezekiel stepped forward once, slow. "She's not property, she's not for sale." Silence, then Holly's turned back to his horse and swung up. "No hard feelings," he said, "just wanted to check. But you watch your back done. Some debt's got long legs." He rode off with dust spinning behind him like a warning. That night, Clara took her supper alone by the window, her plate untouched. Ezekiel didn't speak until he heard her breath shift. "He your kin." She shook her head. "He want money, he ain't gettin' it." Still no answer. What did he mean about your mother? This time, she did look at him. "She sold me to him first," she said, her voice barely louder than a breath, "when I was 14. The words settled like cold iron in the space between them. "I ran. I hid in a church for a while, told them I couldn't speak, wouldn't speak. Got sent to the mission school for deaf girls. They kept me fed. I learned to sew, learned to clean, learned to be quiet." She sipped her water. Then the broker came, said my mother'd sign me off again. Same man, said I was his by contract. The only way out was if someone else claimed me. Ezekiel sat back. "So you wrote." She nodded, didn't care what kind of man answered, just needed one that wasn't him. He looked at her, really looked. At the burn scars along her right arm, at the way her shoulders flinched before every sound, like she was braced for it to hurt. Why keep the act? Clara didn't look away, because people talk more when they think you can't hear. Especially men. He nodded once. That night he oiled the Henry rifle and set it by the window. For the next week, nothing came. No riders, no messages, but something in Clara shifted. She walked lighter, kept a knife on her belt. Watched the road with a predator's patience. On the 8th day, Ezekiel came in from the south pasture and found her on the floor of the front room with a bundle of cloth and paper spread before her. Sewing a patch into an old jacket, inside of which she'd hidden a stub-nosed revolver. "You know how to use that?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she loaded it, slowly, without looking up. And Ezekiel realized then that she wasn't waiting to be hunted. She was setting the trap. They came at dawn on the 14th day, 2 riders and a third on foot trailing behind like a ghost. No greetings, no show of hands. Just the sound of hooves on dry earth and the glint of metal under saddle flaps. Ezekiel was already on the porch, rifle across his knees. Clara stood inside the house, curtain drawn aside, her revolver loaded and hidden in the folds of her skirt. The lead rider was young, cocky, red-haired with a gut that hadn't seen hunger. He had Hollis's grin but not his age. The second was older, heavier, his left eye clouded white. The third wasn't a man at all. She was a woman. Barefoot, skin gone paper pale, eyes like damp coals, the mother. "Mr. Dunn," the redhead called, tugging his horse to a halt. "We got business with the girl." Ezekiel didn't rise. "Ain't no girl here, just Clara. And she don't owe you nothin'." "She does," the older man said, voice hoarse. "Owes her own blood." The mother stepped forward then. Her hands shook, but her mouth twisted in a sneer. She spoke like someone who traded her soul in ounces. "She's mine. You think $50 ends that? She belongs to me until I say otherwise." Ezekiel stood. His voice was calm. "She belonged to you the minute you sold her. She stopped the minute she stepped onto this land." Clara stepped out then, silent. Armed, the men shifted in their saddles. The mother's face darkened, a shadow of something long curdled. "She ain't deaf," Hollis hissed behind his teeth. "No," Clara said clearly, cocking the hammer back. "I'm not." They didn't draw, not yet. They hadn't figured her out, not entirely. That was her edge. Ezekiel's voice didn't rise, but it carried. "Ride out now, and maybe you keep your kneecaps. Stay, and we bury what's left." The redhead laughed once, sharp. "You think we're scared of a mute and a washed-up rancher." Clara's shot hit the dirt between his boots. The sound cracked across the plain like thunder in a church. The horse spooked. The man swore, but he didn't move forward. "She's not deaf," the older man muttered. "She's been listening, god damn." Hollis rode forward then, slow and careful. "She was mine once," he said to Clara. "You remember, don't you? You remember what you owe." "I remember," she said, lifting the barrel. "I remember the cellar floor. I remember your breath. I remember what you did while my mother watched." The silence after that was different, no longer tense, no longer posturing. It was deadly. The mother lunged forward, shrieking, fingernails out. Clara shot her in the leg. She dropped screaming, clutching her thigh. The older man pulled his gun, but Ezekiel's rifle barked, and he tumbled from his saddle, blood pouring from his shoulder. The redhead ran. Clara didn't shoot him in the back, not out of mercy. She was saving him. They dragged the woman to the barn, tied her with feed rope, and packed the wound with raw cotton and whiskey. The older man groaned on the porch, bleeding slow into the planks. He'd live, though Ezekiel doubted he'd ride again. They didn't speak much afterward. Clara tended the animals, stitched a new pair of trousers for Ezekiel, scrubbed blood off the barn floor until her knuckles cracked. She worked harder than ever, not out of fear, but clarity. One night, weeks later, he found her sitting by the creek with the revolver laid across her lap. She didn't flinch when he approached. "She was supposed to die," Clara said. "When I ran the first time, I thought maybe she'd drink herself dead. But she didn't. She found worse men. She sold more girls. There are things you don't see in daylight." Ezekiel sat beside her, said nothing. "I let them live," she whispered. "The ones I could have killed. You think that was wrong." He thought on that a while. Wrong don't mean much out here. There's just what you can live with and what you can't. She looked at him. In the dark, her eyes gleamed with something hard, forged. I want to go back, she said, to Wichita Falls, find the rest, the ones who bought, the ones who knew. Ezekiel nodded. Then we go. Just like that, no promises, no comfort, just the road rising to meet them. They left Snake Hollow in the lull between seasons, after the calves were branded and the sky had settled from its last thunder fit. Ezekiel packed light, 2 rifles, a skinning knife, and his father's Bible, unopened. Clara took less. A coat, the revolver, and the name she'd carved into the lining of a sewing basket when she was 13. They rode separate horses, but not separate paths. No one from Dry Marrow saw them off. No one asked where they were headed. That was the thing about places like that. Everybody knew, and nobody wanted to name it. Wichita Falls had grown swollen with money since Clara last saw it. Oil and cattle money, mostly, and rail lines feeding vice into the bones of the town. The streets were wider now, the brothels cleaner, but under the paint, rot still thrived. They stayed in a boarding house on the east edge of town, a widow-run place with strict rules and thin walls. Ezekiel took the room at the front. Clara took the one near the fire escape. The first man was easy to find. He ran a gambling den 2 blocks from the old train station, painted his mustache with pomade, and had a silver tooth. Ezekiel watched from across the saloon while Clara walked in alone, wearing gloves and a ribbon in her hair. She played the part of a traveler looking for safe company. She sat at his table, let him talk, laughed once at something he said. Then she leaned in and said a single word into his ear. The color left his face. He stood too fast, chair scraping. She stood slower, took him by the hand, and led him outside. Ezekiel followed. They found a quiet alley behind the butcher. He tried to run when he saw Ezekiel, but Clara had the pistol drawn and steady. "Where are the others?" she asked. "I don't know," he stammered. "It was years ago. I just arranged them." "They were the ones who—" She shot him in the foot. He dropped screaming. "Names," she said. He gave 3, one in Abilene, one still in Wichita, one dead. They left him there, crawling through meat rot and gutter water. The second name was harder. A banker, clean reputation, lived 2 stories above a marble-fronted office. Ezekiel watched the house for 3 nights. The man never left after sundown, had a daughter now, a wife, good clothes, fine china. Clara climbed to the balcony in the rain. She didn't kill him, not right away. She tied him to the bed with curtain cords and made him listen as she recited every girl's name she remembered. 62, some dead, some disappeared. She made him repeat them. Then she gagged him and pressed the barrel to his chest. Ezekiel stood outside in the alley when the shot came. Thunder without a storm. No one called the law. They left town before morning, headed west. Days bled into weeks. Each name on her list brought them to a new town, a new lie, a new man who thought the past had drowned behind him. Some Clara killed, some she didn't. The ones who begged didn't fare better than the ones who denied. It wasn't rage. It was ritual, deliberate, measured. Like she was burying something, not them, and each grave brought her closer to the marrow of it. Ezekiel didn't stop her. He kept watch, covered the tracks, dug when she was too worn to do it herself. He didn't speak of right or wrong anymore. He just made sure they stayed ahead of consequence. They spent one cold night in a burned-out church north of Sweetwater. Clara sat by the ruined altar, hands raw, eyes red-rimmed. She hadn't cried, not once since they left the ranch. "I dream of the cellar sometimes," she said, "of the air. It smelled like milk gone bad and rust." Ezekiel said nothing. "I used to pretend I was deaf for real, in the dark, so I didn't have to hear what they said or what they made the others say." Wind slipped through the broken glass behind her. "But I heard every word, every name." She turned toward him, jaw clenched. "I was never their victim. I was their witness, and I remember all of it." He sat beside her, the floor creaked, his breath fogged. "You think it ends when the list runs out?" he asked. She didn't answer. "I don't think it does," he said. "I think it ends when you say it ends." She stood, "Not yet." They crossed into New Mexico next. A man named Kern lived there, the last one alive from the original ledger. Clara hadn't written his name. She'd scratched it into wood, into skin, into the parts of herself that never healed. He'd been the one who took her first. Not for money, not for business, for pleasure. And she was ready now. Ready in a way she hadn't been at 14, or 18, or any of the years between. They reached his ranch by dusk, watching from the ridge as his men smoked and spit and laughed around a fire. Kern wasn't laughing. He was older now, fat, limping, but still him. Clara stared down at the house with eyes gone black in the fading light. "I want to do this alone," she said. Ezekiel looked once, then nodded. She rode down, a shadow on horseback. He watched from the ridge until the front door opened, and then closed. And then the screaming began. Ezekiel waited on the ridge as the sun dropped and the screaming thinned into groans, then silence. The kind of silence that lives under floorboards, that soaks into splintered walls and never leaves. The house below didn't catch fire. She didn't make a show of it. Clara walked out after 2 hours, covered in sweat, one sleeve torn, her braid loosened. No blood on her, not a drop. She rode back up the slope slow and steady. "He begged," she said, dismounting. "Said he was sorry, said he didn't remember, said he was drunk." She sat cross-legged in the dirt beside Ezekiel, her voice flat. "He asked me if I'd gotten prettier." Ezekiel didn't speak. Clara reached into her coat and pulled out a small, ragged book, a ledger. "I found his records," she said. "He kept notes, prices, dates, ages." She didn't open it. Just stared at the binding like it was a thing that breathed. "There were others," she said. "Not just men, women who scouted, fathers who traded, preachers who blessed it." Ezekiel lit a smoke, let her words drift in the blue haze. "I thought this would be the end," she said, voice quieter now. "I thought it would feel like I'd sealed something shut." She dug her fingers into the dirt. "But it doesn't, it just feels bigger." The stars broke through then, cold and distant. Ezekiel didn't offer comfort, he didn't touch her, but he said, "Then we keep riding." They spent the next 3 days heading east. Clara hardly slept. She read the ledger at night by firelight, lips moving in silence. She made notes in the margins, reorganized the names, traced lines between initials. At the edge of Texas, in a town called Lathe, they met a woman named Dinah Poe. She ran a dry goods store, lived alone. Mid-40s with a hawk's stare and an old scar down her cheek. She saw Clara looking at the shelves and said nothing until the others had left the store. "I know you," Dinah said. "You're her daughter." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Whose?" "Margaret Renly. She came through here years back, sold a girl to a man in Odessa, said she needed train fare." "I'm not her daughter," Clara said. "Blood says different," Dinah replied. "But I see you ain't her, not really." Dinah poured 2 glasses of water. Didn't ask if Clara wanted one. "She was poison," Dinah said. "Took men with her when she smiled, some women too. Told me once that girls were just cattle. Said it plain. I should have shot her right there." "You helped her," Clara said. "I didn't stop her," Dinah answered. "That's the same thing." Clara nodded. "Do you have a gun?" Dinah tilted her head. "Why?" "Because I'm not here for blood. Not yours. Not if you help." Dinah stared at her for a long time, then walked behind the counter, pulled out a small pistol, and placed it gently on the wood. "I kept it," she said, "for her." Clara took the gun, turned it in her hand. "You'll get a letter," she said, "with names, pass them west." Then she left. Ezekiel said nothing as they rode on. They stopped in a canyon 2 days later. No town. Just stone and silence. Clara sat beside the fire, the ledger in her lap. She ripped out the pages one by one, burned them. "I know them now," she said. "Don't need the book." Each flame ate a piece of her past. Ezekiel watched, quiet. Always quiet. "I used to wonder if I'd ever feel clean again," she said. "If I could wash it all off. The things they did, the things I did." She looked at the ashes. But maybe it's not about getting clean. She lifted her head, eyes clear. Maybe it's about making the dirt answer. The wind blew through the canyon, stirring the smoke. That night they made camp without words. The stars burned above them, same as ever, but something beneath them had shifted. Clara no longer moved like she was chasing ghosts. Now she moved like one, and the road ahead still had names. They rode into the Badlands in early October. The horizon cracked with ochre cliffs and dried creeks, the kind of place where things disappeared and were never looked for again. Word had traveled by then, quiet word. Rumor spun from the mouths of men who limped or wept or drank too much to sleep. They called her the silent wife. They called her Ghost Clara. They called her the girl who heard everything and spared nothing, and they said she was coming. By then, she didn't need to ask questions. Men confessed at the sight of her. Some wept, some offered names unasked. Others ran, but they never ran fast enough. Not with Ezekiel tracking the ground behind her like a bloodhound with no leash. In the town of Malachite, she left a sheriff hanging from the rafters of his own jailhouse. In Roel Bend, she torched a gambling hall and walked out covered in soot, eyes red but dry. In Hollow Jack, she forced a preacher to read the names of every girl sold through his mission, one by one, until his throat split and he choked on blood. Still the list narrowed, the nights grew longer, her voice thinner. She began speaking less, eating less. Ezekiel watched her walk alone in the mornings, barefoot through frost, whispering to herself, not prayers, names. They stopped at a river camp south of Elkhorn one evening, and she didn't eat. Just sat staring at the fire. He finally asked, "How many left?" She looked up, eyes so tired they looked carved from something older than bone. "One." He didn't ask who, he knew. The trail to her mother led them through ghost towns and burned-out rail posts. No one claimed to have seen Margaret Renly, but the lies were easy to spot. There were always shadows behind them. Women who looked away too quickly, boys with bruises. She was still trading, still moving, still cutting flesh for coin. Clara didn't sleep the last 3 nights before they reached her. She walked ahead of the horses, her coat flaring behind her, hands never straying far from the pistol grip. She stopped eating, drank only when Ezekiel made her. Her eyes had gone dull and flat, like water over ash. The final camp was nestled in a canyon bend. A clapboard shack, 3 pack animals, 2 men drinking by a fire and 1 woman in a red shawl counting silver in her lap. Clara stepped into the clearing before they could rise. Ezekiel hung back, rifle ready. The woman didn't flinch, just looked up, grinning like a hangman's rope. "Well," she said, voice syruped with rot, "there she is." No one moved. "I thought you'd be prettier," Margaret said. "But I guess I sold that part off first." Clara didn't speak. The 2 men stood, one drawing steel. Ezekiel shot him through the throat. The second turned and ran. He got maybe 20 paces. Clara still hadn't moved. Her mother rose. "I suppose you think I'm sorry," she said. "I suppose you think this makes you clean." Clara stepped forward once. "You sold me." Margaret scoffed. "I sold what I didn't want. That's what mothers do, same as men." "Same as God." "You watched." "I watched," she said, "and I survived just like you." Clara lifted the gun. "You're not me," she said. The shot echoed through the canyon, clean, centered. Margaret fell backward into the dirt with her mouth still twisted, as if she meant to speak one last lie. Clara didn't lower the pistol, just stared down at her mother's body as the wind picked up and scattered ash and leaves across the clearing. Ezekiel walked to her side. "It's done," he said. She didn't answer for a long while, then softly, "No." He looked at her. "It'll never be done," she said, "but I don't have to carry it anymore." She turned from the body and walked back the way they'd come, one slow step at a time, like every step pressed something deeper into the dirt. Ezekiel followed. They didn't look back. By the time the sun broke over the canyon rim, the shack was in shadow, the fire out, the silver forgotten, and two riders moved east into silence, not the silence of the deaf or the dead, but the silence of something finished and something free.